Why did Islamic schools of law develop? The story of Abu Hanifa and the Hanafi tradition. When many Americans hear the word Madhhab or school of Islamic law, they may imagine competing denominations, but that comparison is misleading. The major Sunni schools are not different religions, and they do not disagree about Islam's basic foundations. They are better understood as traditions of legal interpretation, organized methods for answering practical questions through the Qur'an, the teachings and practice of the Prophet Muhammad, and the work of earlier scholars. So why were these schools needed? The Qur'an was revealed in Arabic in 7th century Arabia, and the Prophet Muhammad taught people who understood his language, society, customs, and circumstances directly. When a question arose, his companions could ask him. His presence gave the first Muslim community a living source of explanation. After the Prophet's death in 632, the situation changed. Revelation had ended, while Muslim society expanded far beyond Mecca and Medina. Within generations, Muslims were living across Iraq, Syria, Egypt, North Africa, Persia, Central Asia, and other regions. These lands had different languages, commercial systems, family customs, political traditions, and legal problems. Imagine applying constitutional principles written in one historical setting to new cities, technologies, and millions of people from different backgrounds. The principles may remain, but trained interpretation becomes necessary. American judges do not read one sentence of the Constitution and automatically agree about every modern case. They study language, precedent, context, and legal principles. Early Muslim jurists faced a different system, but a similar challenge. How should authoritative texts guide situations not described word for word in those texts? This is where fiqh developed. Sharia refers broadly to God's guidance, while fiqh is the human scholarly effort to understand and apply that guidance. A madhhab is not merely a list of answers. It is a disciplined method for deciding which evidence matters, how texts should be interpreted, how reports should be evaluated, and how new cases connect to established principles. One of the most influential figures in this history was Abu Hanifa, whose full name was al-Nu'man ibn Thabit. He was born around 699 in Kufa, in present-day Iraq, and died in 767. Kufa was a major center of trade, politics, religious learning, and legal thought. Abu Hanifa also worked as a merchant, surrounded by real questions about contracts, debts, property, family life, taxation, and government. Sunni Muslims often call him Imam al-Azam, meaning the greatest Imam. The title reflects his later reputation, but the Hanafi school was not created by one man writing a complete legal code. Abu Hanifa did not leave behind a surviving book of jurisprudence containing every Hanafi ruling. His teachings were discussed, tested, transmitted, and developed through a circle of students. Two students were especially important, Abu Yusuf and Muhammad al-Shaybani. Abu Yusuf later became a major judge, while al-Shaybani became a central writer and transmitter of early Hanafi doctrine. They sometimes disagreed with their teacher. That point matters. A legal school was not blind loyalty to every personal opinion of its founder. It was an ongoing scholarly tradition in which evidence, reasoning, experience, and new circumstances could refine earlier conclusions. So what sources did the Hanafi tradition use? First came the Qur'an, the highest and most authoritative source. Second came the Sunnah, the reported words, actions, and approvals of the Prophet Muhammad. Jurists examined the transmission, meaning, context, and relationship of these reports to the Qur'an and to other evidence. The tradition also gave weight to the legal understandings of the Prophet's companions, especially where their knowledge or agreement offered guidance. Another major principle was ijma, usually translated as scholarly consensus. An established agreement among qualified scholars carried authority and prevented every private opinion from being treated as equally valid. Then came Qiyas, or analogical reasoning. Qiyas connects a new case to an established ruling. Because both share the same effective cause, a modern audience might think of reasoning by legal precedent. The comparison is not exact, but the question is familiar. If a rule exists for one case, does the same underlying reason apply to another case that did not previously exist? The Hanafi tradition also became especially associated with Istihsan, often translated as juristic preference or discretion. This does not mean choosing whatever feels convenient. It means that a jurist may leave a strict analogy when stronger evidence, necessity, fairness, established practice, or the prevention of hardship supports a better conclusion. Custom, known as urf, could also matter, especially in trade, contracts, and ordinary social practice, as long as it did not contradict a clear religious rule. This allowed jurists to recognize that daily life in Kufa, Damascus, Bukhara, Cairo, or later Istanbul could differ while remaining within the same religious framework. Why, then, did Hanafi rulings sometimes differ from Maliki, Shafi, or Hanbali rulings? Usually, the disagreement was not over whether the Quran and the Prophet mattered. It concerned interpretation. Scholars might evaluate a report differently, understand an Arabic expression differently, disagree about whether a rule was general or limited, or assign different weight to analogy, custom, necessity, or the opinions of the companions. That is why a madhhab should not be reduced to, "We do it this way because our imam said so." A serious legal school preserves generations of arguments. It records majority opinions, minority opinions, exceptions, conditions, and debates. In some cases, later Hanafi scholars prefer the view of Abu Yusuf or al-Shaybani over the view attributed to Abu Hanifa. The rise of the madhhabs was therefore not simply a story of Muslims dividing into camps. It was the story of a growing civilization preserving religious sources while facing new realities. The schools created structure, consistency, professional training, and a shared language for disagreement. For American viewers, the key takeaway is this: Islamic law was never only a collection of isolated quotations. It became a sophisticated interpretive tradition. Abu Hanifa's legacy was not that he replaced the Qur'an and Sunnah with personal opinion. His legacy was that he helped build a disciplined way to reason from those sources. When society presented questions with no one-line answer, here is the question for the comments. Do legal traditions become stronger when scholars preserve multiple interpretations? Or does that diversity make religious law harder for ordinary people to understand? Share your view below and subscribe for clear, historically grounded discussions of Islamic belief, law, scholarship, and civilization.